So in the first troubleshooting walkthrough, we found that there were several issues that could be faulty on your own laptop or tablet. Switches being turned off, software being disabled, cables not being plugged in correctly, stuff like that. In the second troubleshooting video, just before this one, we discovered primarily by looking at the lights, the LEDs, the displays on your cable or DSL modem, that you actually had a non-functioning connection to your ISP. That your ISP connection was bad, and it wasn't any fault of your own. You'd already isolated everything in your particular laptop that could be bad. You've looked at your cabling. It was their issue. And so you had to call them up and have them troubleshoot it. Now we're going to look at a different issue where your connection to the ISP is valid, and it actually turns out that the website server, the server that's holding that web page, has some kind of a problem on it. So let's walk through that. Okay, so once again, can't get to my favorite website. Now, just like we saw before, the next test is always the exact same thing. Can I get to anything else? Let's rule out a general problem versus a specific problem. So let's say the answer is yes. Okay, so some websites come up, but the one you're trying to get to does not. Now, we've already talked about how your laptop requires an IP address and the remote server requires an IP address, and how you need to use DNS to resolve the IP address of that remote side. And we've talked about DNS, so I don't think there's anything here that I want to talk about. Oh, just one additional little thing that had not been brought up so far. If we're talking about you're trying to reach a website of a rather small company, then it's quite possible that they've only got one box, one server that's serving up that website. But a lot of the larger companies, especially like Google and Cisco and stuff, when you try to go to cisco.com or google.com, they might actually have multiple servers scattered throughout the country or even scattered throughout the world that have the exact same content. So for example, if I'm living on the East Coast, which I am, I'm in North Carolina, and I try to go to google.com, chances are highly likely that when I do a DNS resolution, I say, hey, DNS server, give me the IP address of google.com. Well, number one, the DNS server I'm trying to reach is probably also on the East Coast with me. It's probably less than 100 miles from where I live. Secondly, because that DNS server is on the East Coast, remember, who owns it? My service provider, Time Warner Cable, Sprint, Comcast. They own the DNS server that they told me to use. Well, how did that DNS server get the name of Google and the IP address in there? I mean, my service provider isn't telepathic, right? They don't know every single new company that comes online, everything. So at some point in time, somebody at Google's company had to contact my ISP and say, hey, in your DNS server, we want you to type in this setting. If somebody looks up google.com, we want you to resolve it to this particular IP address. So if the person at Google who's responsible for that, if they were calling up Time Warner Cable located in North Carolina, what do you think they did? Do you think they told the Time Warner Cable North Carolina, oh, here's the IP address of Google that lives in China? They didn't do that. They said, okay, we know we're calling a service provider that's on the East Coast. We know we have a Google server on the East Coast. So we're going to give them the IP address of that server. So when you're resolving a name to an IP address, there might be more than one server out there that's actually capable of giving you that content. But you might not know about those because your DNS server gives you back the one that's local to you or somewhat local to you. Now, how do you know of that? You can't. I mean, there's really no easy way I can think of to figure out how many web servers does Cisco have throughout the world and what are all of their IP addresses. They might not even want to tell you that for security reasons, but the short of that is you're going to be going to the one that's closest to you geographically if they have more than one. Okay, so the next thing is, in the next section in our troubleshooting, we're going to be asking ourselves this question. When I go to my DNS server and give it a name on my web page, like ine.com, google.com, how do I know it's working? In other words, how do I know that DNS server is actually giving me a name? Now, if we're talking about websites, troubleshooting that is actually pretty easy. I mean, step number one is you have to know the name, right? What is the name I'm providing to the DNS server? Because in my test, I'm going to have to know that name. So if I type in google.com or cnn.com, guess what? That's the name. That's the name that's going to the DNS server. But a lot of other applications you have running on your laptop, such as email, such as instant messaging, guess what? They also use DNS. You know, for example, the chat software that we use here at INE is called HipChat. Probably several of the rest of you also use HipChat for your instant messaging. And when I open up HipChat on my laptop, I don't know what the IP address is of the HipChat server. We don't own that. We don't own the company that handles that software. And whoever gave me the laptop, they don't know what the IP address is of the HipChat server. So there's some DNS going on. My laptop, when I start up the HipChat software, it's sending out some name saying, hey, HipChat, there's the name, give me the IP address. But I don't know what the name of that server is. I don't know even what's asking for. So the question then becomes, okay, if I'm troubleshooting DNS, you know, I'm opening my email and it's not working. It says can't contact the server. I'm opening up, you know, HipChat or Yahoo Chat or something. It says can't contact the server. Well, I can guess that's probably trying to resolve a name to an IP address. But in the first stage of my troubleshooting, I have to know, what is that name? It's not as easy as web browsing. So I'll show you in the next section some ways that we can discover what that name is. Okay, can I get to any other websites? Yes, I can. So it's not a general internet problem. It's not a system down connection with my service provider. Does DNS actually resolve the broken website to an IP address? Here's where the troubleshooting can get a little tricky. So let's start with the easy stuff, okay? Let's say that you know what the name is. You're trying to go to, let's just say, ine.com in your web browser. You typed in ine.com, so you know the name. Is it actually resolving it to an IP address? Well, we can test that. And there's a couple of different ways we can do it. Let's start out with the easiest way. Assuming that you know what the name is, once again, open up your friendly command window, your DOS prompt, and use this command, ns lookup, and then type in the name, ine.com. As soon as I hit enter, this is actually forcing a DNS lookup. This is saying, hey, I don't have to open up a web browser or something. Do it for me. Do a DNS lookup on ine.com. And the very fact that I got some IP addresses means it worked. I got it. Now let me try to do an NS lookup on, oh, I don't know. I'm going to try to think of something that probably doesn't exist. How about frazzleizzy.com? I probably doesn't exist. Let's see. Okay, there you go. Can't find frazzleizzy.com, non-existent domain. So what that's telling me is that the resolution failed. That here's the DNS server, it's verifying, it says, okay, I tried to go to 8888 and I was not able to resolve that name. Now, is it a problem with the DNS server? Maybe I couldn't even get to 888. Nope, I can get there, right? The fact that I can ping it tells me that DNS server is reachable, but when I sent that DNS server this name, it said, sorry, I have no entry for that. Now, one of two things could be wrong at this point. One of two things. Actually, one of three things. Number one, maybe I just mistyped the name, right? That happens sometimes, right? You intended to type google.com and you type groogle.com or gloople.com or something like that, and that doesn't exist. So that's the easiest thing, right? Check to make sure you typed it in correctly. Number two, maybe this website you're trying to go to doesn't actually exist. You have a friend you were talking to over lunch, and you thought your friend said, oh, I just found this great website called snazzlefritz.com. You should go there. It's got the latest deals on laptops. Well, they didn't actually say Snazzlefritz. They said something else, but that's what you heard. And so now you go to Snazzlefritz and you get nothing. Well, it's because there's no entry. It's not legitimate. Or number three, and this is unlikely, but it could happen. Servers run different types of software at the same time, just like your laptop, right? Like right now on your laptop, you're running some sort of browser. That's how you're watching me. You're probably also running some sort of email client. You might be running some sort of instant messaging as well. Well, Google's server that serves up the Google web page might also be used for other things. Like maybe that exact same box is being used as the email server for Google's employees. Maybe that exact same box is an instant messaging server for their employees. Why do I say that? Well, I can ping it, right? I just pinged 8.8.8.8, so I know that box exists. I know it's reachable across the internet. But the fact that I was not able to bring up the website, maybe it's telling me that the actual software in that website, the DNS software responsible for resolving names, maybe that's broken. Maybe the server itself is functional, it can respond to pings, but the DNS portion of it is down, it's broken. That's a possibility as well. So here, so let's say I am able to resolve the broken website to an IP address. I'm trying to get to ine.com and yep, it worked. NSLookup, ine.com. And sure enough, I got a couple of IP addresses. So DNS is working. Now, before I leave this, what if you don't know the name? For example, let's say I have an email application on my laptop, and it says unable to connect to the server. And I say, okay. Or let's use HipChat. HipChat is our instant messaging service here at the office. And the HipChat says can't connect to the server, it just spins and spins and spins. And I wonder, okay, well, is HipChat using DNS and was it unable to resolve it? And if so, what name was it trying to resolve? Well, another thing you can do, like I mentioned, every time DNS resolution happens in your laptop, it's stored in your laptop. There's a cache that stores all DNS responses stored locally in memory. And there's a way to actually see all that stuff. So let me show you method number 2. So once again, in my DOS prompt, I could type ipconfig, our favorite command, and then display DNS. ipconfig / display DNS. Hit enter. And there's some DNS entries. Not a whole lot in this particular case. Let's try going to some websites to populate that a little bit more. Let's try google.com. All right, I'm just doing this offline. You can't see this. Time.com. And let's try CNN.com. Okay, I've resolved all those. You didn't see it. Okay, so notice, I just did a whole bunch of stuff in the background. I just went to 3 different web pages, ine.com, CNN.com, and time.com. And as a result of that, when I did this display DNS, look how many things it populated in my laptop. 3 websites, and yet it gave me all this stuff. It's Matter of fact, I can't even scroll up to the top. I'm done. I can't even reach the top entry. Now, why am I looking at this? I said initially my problem was I could not connect to my instant messaging server. And I'm wondering, did it try to resolve something via DNS? And if so, did it work? Well, this is kind of unusable, isn't it? Because there could be so many entries in here, I can't even see them all. If I try going to the top, it stops. Well, another thing you can do, use the same command, but now I can take the output, instead of putting the output here in my DOS window, I can output it to a text file that I can open up and read separately. So I would do the same command, and then I would use the greater than symbol, C:\\. So I'm saying, take the output of display DNS of that command and instead send it to my C drive. I'll give it the name of, let's say, ine.txt. Access is denied. Why am I getting this? Because this is one of those commands you have to do from the administrator level. Remember how I showed you the route print command in a previous video? And I said you had to open up DOS as an administrator? Same thing for this. So let's go ahead and open up my DOS prompt once again as an administrator by right-clicking on it and doing Run as Administrator. And now it says Administrator Command Prompt. I don't know if you guys can see that, but it's in the upper left corner. So now I do ipconfig/display DNS, but instead of displaying it on my screen, which will pretty much be useless to me because there'll be too many things for me to look at, I'm going to send it to a text file. And I can call this whatever I want. ine.txt, bob.txt, as long as it's something.txt. Okay, did it work? Well, let's find out. So now let's go to my computer and go to my C drive, and there is ine.txt. Open that up, and here is everything that has been resolved via DNS from my laptop. Now, what was I trying to troubleshoot? I was trying to troubleshoot HipChat, my instant messaging service. So now because I open it up in a text file, I can search, edit, find. Let's try HipChat. Nothing. All right, maybe it was hipchat.com. Nothing. HipChat. Nothing. Well, now at this point, I probably just have to scroll through this, painful as it may be, and look for some mention of HipChat. Or what may have happened, this is probably what happened. I've had my HipChat open for quite a while, and the stuff that's stored in the DNS cache here doesn't stay here forever. I mean, eventually it has to age out and go away to make room for some new stuff. So let me take down my instant messaging service here. I'll just shut it down and log out. Okay. Now I'm going to log back into it again, which I believe should start a new DNS resolution. Okay, it just came online. So now let me do the same command again. Now before I do it, notice that ine.txt was what? It was 23 kilobytes. I just opened up something new. I just opened up HipChat, or at least I tried to. I redo the command, refresh my window. It's gotten a lot smaller now. Now it's only 7 kilobytes. hipchat.com. And there we go. Now I have an entry. So I can tell that HipChat successfully resolved itself via DNS to actually several IP addresses. Now you might be thinking, well, when I'm doing email or browsing or something or instant messaging, I don't know what name it's going to look up. How would I even know what name to search on? I would just recommend starting by doing a find on just the name of the program. If that doesn't work, well then unfortunately you're just going to have to scroll through this stuff and try to see if there's an entry in here. And some of the entries, like this one, name does not exist. So that's an example of something where it tried to look it up and DNS resolution failed. Any other ones in here? Looks like most everything else successfully got an IP address. All right, and there's one more way that you can discover if DNS resolution was successful. Now this is only applicable if you are doing web browsing, and it's only applicable if you're using Chrome as your browser. So that might exclude many of you right there. But, so here I am in Google Chrome, and I just ran across this interesting command the other day. In the URL field, you can say Chrome : and now you can actually input some commands into Chrome. In this case, I'm going to say net-internals $DNS. And as soon as I do this, now it's going to start recording every time I try to look up something. So this is the current stuff it already knows about. So you look at all this stuff. It actually tells you all the things it's looked up and the IP addresses. Now let me look up something I've never looked up before. Let me go to a new window and try looking up, I don't know, how about clock.com? All right, so it doesn't look like clock.com exists. So now what I do is I go back to this, and in the upper right corner, I don't know if you can see this very well, but along this red bar, there's a little arrow right here. If I click it, capture stop. And now I can do Control F. This is for searching anything within Chrome. Control F on your keyboard. Now let's type in clock. And there it is, clock.com. Let me actually increase this a little bit so you can see it. So when I typed in clock.com, it looks like it resolved to this. And this is probably an address owned by my service provider, when they don't know something, because what did I get? I got this. Somebody owns this web page. I'm not sure who it is. It could be my service provider, but this is who owns it. It says click here to buy clock.com for your website name. So nobody actually owns clock.com, but somebody owns this, whatever this is, and this resolved to this IP address. So that's something kind of neat that you can do in Google Chrome. I'm sure other browsers like Firefox and Internet Explorer probably have something similar, but in Google Chrome you've got this net-internals that you can use to see all the DNS resolutions you've had. And look at this. This is just a ton of them. Most of them are expired because they only stay for a little bit of time. But at least you can see if it actually worked. Okay, so in this particular case, we're saying, does DNS actually resolve the broken website to an IP address? Now, if the answer was no, you'd see this, error, name not resolved. And at that point, you're done with this walkthrough. You'd have to move on to the next one. What if it did? We did NS lookup, and it worked. We got an IP address. Can you ping the IP address of the website? Okay, so let's bring up my DOS prompt again. And I say ns lookup, I don't know, date.com. I got something. Now let's say I was trying to actually go to date.com and it wasn't coming up. It was just spinning and spinning and spinning and spinning. Well, now I've just verified that the DNS server actually knows about it. It gave me the IP address. I try to ping it, 208.69.184.8. Now before I ping it, let's say I pinged it and the answer was yes, I can ping it. Okay, now in this particular case, I'm not able to ping it. Date.com, it gave me an IP address. Is it actually reachable? It's probably some dating website, but let's see what happens when I try to go to it. Actually, it is a dating website. How funny is that? So in this particular case, this is actually a good learning moment right here. This is just the opposite. This is an example of where I can get to a website, but I'm not able to actually ping it. What does that mean? Remember how I said that a device like a server could be running multiple different processes at the same time. It could be running a web server where it can handle out web pages. That same server could maybe be an email server for the employees of that company. Well, when you issue the ping command, that's actually using a special protocol. Now, for those of you who are not interested in networking at all, you can just ignore this. But for those of you who are pursuing your CCNA or above, ping uses a protocol called ICMP, the Internet Control Messaging Protocol, ICMP. Well, clearly, this server, date.com, even though it does give me a web page, is not responding to ping, which means the network administrator who owns that server has turned off ICMP. They purposefully turned it off, probably to prevent attacks, because sometimes people can use ICMP to intentionally try to bring down a server. They'll just flood it with pings in order to overwhelm the server and cause it to die and crash. So one of the security mechanisms that a lot of companies do is they'll say, look, I'll let my server give you a website, but I'm not going to let you ping it. So I'm going to turn off ICMP. So that's what I'm suspecting happened right here. Now in our example, we've got just the opposite. Tried to go to a website, didn't work. Attempted to see if I was actually doing DNS resolution, the website to an IP address. That worked. Tried to ping that IP address, as we can see here. That worked. At this point, your troubleshooting is done. So what do you know? Well, number one, we know we've got internet connectivity because I was able to do an ICMP. I was able to do a ping from my laptop all the way to wherever that server happens to live. I don't know where it lives, but I was able to ping it and get a ping response. So clearly, my network connectivity is not down. Clearly, that server actually exists, because if it didn't exist, it wouldn't respond to the ping. So there's something wrong with that server. It's responding to pings, but it's not responding to my requests to get the web page. So now I should probably contact the owner of that destination website. Notice what I wrote here. I didn't say contact your ISP, because maybe your ISP doesn't own that website, right? If I'm not able to get to google.com, but I can ping it, do you think Time Warner Cable owns the google.com website? Probably not. I should probably try to figure out a contact number for Google and call them up and say, hey, I just want to let you know, can't get to your website right now. You might want to look into that.